So enter into the mind of a killer, and you may never be able to come back in this original adaptation of the novel that introduced the world to Dr. Hannibal Lecter in Michael Mann's unique and stylish thriller by the name of Manhunter. When two idyllic families are slain in the same manner on an apparent lunar cycle with no leads whatsoever, FBI agent Jack Crawford is forced to enlist the aid of his friend and retired profiler, Will Graham. Hesitant to return after his psychologically damaging encounter with a psychopath known as Hannibal Lecter, Will chooses to grant Crawford his request. Graham's process at hunting down a methodical, disturbed killer is to soak himself into their psychology and see things through their eyes. However, when Graham goes to visit the criminally insane Dr. Lecter to regain the mindset, it starts a chain reaction that brings the suspected Tooth Fairy serial murderer into contact with Lecter and forces Graham into the forefront of the investigation. Now, with time running short towards the next full moon, Graham must discover the killer within himself in order to catch the flesh and blood man who proves to be the damaged and complex Francis Dolarhyde, who is driven by the power of the great red dragon into becoming something greater than himself. So on August 15th, 1986, the very first adaptation of the Thomas Harris novel Red Dragon was released into cinemas under the conspicuous title of Manhunter, after producer Dino De Laurentiis had pretty much poor fortunes with the recently released Mickey Rourke film Year of the Dragon, and decided to kind of distance the title of the two films as much as possible, and some kind of implication in his mind where audiences might think the title Red Dragon would imply some sort of chop-socky ninja flick, much to the dismay of everyone who worked on the film, who very much felt like the title of the novel should have remained intact for the film. And Dino De Laurentiis had courted director David Lynch after they had a relationship working on Dune together, but that dissolved fairly quickly. And so he then decided to approach filmmaker Michael Mann, who is hot off the success of his executive-produced television series of Miami Vice, which put him in the prime position to adapt this property as the director and sole screenwriter of the film, and Mann brought forth so many of the various qualities he had already put into his previous film and television projects, taking the technical precision of Thief, researching with actual FBI profilers and forensic experts, and bring forth so much of the surrealist visual style he kind of perfected in The Keep, and so many of the different very much gritty crime elements of Miami Vice kind of sprinkle in there with the neon pastel type of colorscapes and various other elements as well. So Mann was able to bring forth all these little things that kind of worked for him, really kind of helped forge him as a storyteller and a filmmaker, and create some very successful properties and very fascinating, intriguing imagery as well. Mann brought forth all these qualities together and coalesced them under Thomas Harris's story into his own adapted screenplay. And I think so much of what Michael Mann decided to do artistically in this film, and the things he decided to kind of mold and a little bit kind of omit or change about Thomas Harris's novel into this film, I think works towards the benefit of what Mann was trying to accomplish with Manhunter in general. And Mann was very much interested in exploring the psychological aspects of the themes of the story and the characters and their dynamics and relationships, and how so many of them reflect back upon one another in the way of, like, you got Francis Dolarhyde here, who's this guy who puts the nuclear suburban family up on this interesting pedestal of sorts where he resents it but desires it so much. And you have this protagonist of Will Graham, who has generally that. He has a nice, solid, warm family life, but he has to leave that comfort, leave that idyllic type of environment to delve into this dark realm that is Francis Dolarhyde, and just see all this stuff kind of come full circle in a certain way, where you can just see, again, how things reflect back upon one another, where you've got a protagonist who kind of has what the antagonist really wants, but is such a fractured individual in a certain way that you can't really obtain that. And there's so many interesting little things, especially when you get into Graham and Lecter as well. So many of these psychological aspects are what really envelop the film, create the atmosphere as well, to really create an overall absorbing experience with this film. And so much of the very good nature of that type of stuff, how it's executed, comes so much from the cast that Mann put together here. Because first off, with William Petersen as the character of Will Graham, William Petersen had gotten a little role in Thief after he lost out on the role of Jim Belushi, and they just kept in contact for all the years and everything and became very good friends. And it was apparently Mann kind of talking to William Petersen about his script of Heat, where he was at the time still kind of thinking about maybe having someone else direct it while he produced it and wrote the screenplay. But the more the two guys kind of discussed things together, the more it seemed like William Petersen was definitely the fit for the character of Will Graham here, especially after Mann saw To Live and Die in L.A. and Petersen's really solid performance in that film. I think William Petersen does a fantastic job in this film because it is so vital that the driving force of Graham is cast so very well in this film to bring the audience along on this journey into the dark, turbulent mind of a psychopath, but to be tethered to a character that you can feel for, feel the sympathy for, understand what he's going through, the struggles that are building up inside of him, the turmoil, the darkness that he's tapping into, and the history of this character that is all very well carried by William Petersen in his performance. You can see all those little qualities that he kind of brings forth into the character, the trepidation, the kind of revulsion that he has early on in the film when he's first going to Leeds' house and seeing the crime scene aftermath and everything, and just a little tremble in his voice and he's talking to the audio recorder. You just get these little things where you just like, this character is just, he's scared to delve back into that darkness that is within him that drove him towards near death, near insanity and everything. When he tangled with Lecter before, that little stuff is just poking at a very tender wound in sorts that, again, it's just something that's very dangerous for him to tap into, to open up again, but it's something that he eventually starts to get the gears rolling forward in the film. But it's also so much of that humanity that William Petersen brings into the character that still makes him a very sympathetic character that still has those warm ties to his family, still cares about them, and is trying to not get them too well involved with what he's trying to do, but still wants to have that little bit of a connection up to a point in the film where you get so many good scenes between Will and Molly. Kim Griest does a fantastic job in this film, really having a nice counterbalance with William Petersen as this very happy married couple, but she's someone who is very sympathetic, very much understands the dangerous thing that he's doing, trying to solve this case for Jack Crawford and everything. It's something that she understands why he's doing it, but she's also very much concerned for his safety. It's such a great performance from William Petersen that he puts together so many very interesting, subtle qualities into the performance that he's just got, again, this edginess to him, this just quality that just like he's always a little bit just channeling a little bit of that nervous energy, that little bit of darkness within him, that little bit just teetering back and forth on an edge of something that he wants to delve into but is so afraid to go into. It's a nice little balancing act that he does with the film between the intense investigator and the warm family man. But it is the relationship between Will Graham and Hannibal Lecter that so much highlights the sort of compulsion, revulsion dynamic happening within Graham, that he's a guy that once he gets very much started into this investigation, he is so compelled forward, so absolutely determined to keep seeing it through, no matter how much danger he keeps putting himself into, how much more into the forefront of the situation he keeps putting himself into. He keeps moving forward despite how much he is so repulsed by the darkness, this disturbed psyche that he has to keep delving further into. And that's so much from the experience he had with Hannibal Lecter, where he almost disemboweled Graham, trying to stop him from exposing him and everything, and then all this type of stuff that just went in with that relationship into the backstory of this film carries so much baggage with William Petersen's performance, and they do so much interesting type of stuff to move that type of thing forward throughout the entire course of this film. is he going to go that far off the deep end by the end of the film because he's been so scarred by Lecter? It's such an interesting sense of tension with the character and edginess again that you get tapped into so much with his performance and all the story elements and character elements surrounding him that are born so much from his experience with Dr. Hannibal Lecter that creates so many interesting, fascinating qualities with how this character progresses through this entire story. And it's such a really good, again, intense, focused performance from Petersen that even after the film wrapped and he was going on to like a stage production and everything, months later, he could not get the character of Will Graham out of him. He kept reacting as Will Graham. No matter what he was trying to do in this other performance, Will Graham kept coming out of him. And so he eventually just had to go to a salon or whatnot, get his hair cut, hair dyed blonde and shaved fully, just so he could see a completely different person in the mirror after having portrayed this character intensely for such a good solid number of months or whatnot, prepping the film and actually shooting it as well, just delving so far into this character, it really was seeping into his own personality. It's a very good piece of writing, solid piece of direction, and really good acting from William Petersen. And for the casting of Dr. Hannibal Lecter himself in his first on-screen iteration, a couple of interesting names were batted about, including John Lithgow, Mandy Patinkin, and Brian Dennehy, but it was Dennehy himself, who was a friend of Michael Mann's from the television film The Jericho Mile, who actually suggested another actor as the best choice for this role in the form of Scottish actor Brian Cox, who brought forth a very interesting type of approach to the character of Lecter here, because from his youth he knew of a mass murderer in Scotland by the name of Peter Manuel, remembering how much of this guy was completely devoid of morality and sense of right and wrong or empathy of any kind, very much a total sociopath, and that was very much the mentality brought forth into the character of Lecter here. And we've had a couple of other fantastic actors portray the notorious doctor on film and television at this point, but what I love about Brian Cox's sort of under-recognized portrayal of the character is that, again, it's very subtle type of stuff, how he just gets in underneath your skin as a frighteningly intelligent type of character. That, again, Will Graham is this guy who has been inside of the mind of this guy, and even if he's in the same room with him, even with a cell door and glass barriers between the two men, he is still frightened to death of this man, not because of anything physical he can do to him, but all the psychological stuff that he can just wreak upon his mind just to get into his mind for just a second is a terrifying prospect for Will Graham. And just what Brian Cox is able to bring forth with that subtle manipulation of the scenario, where it's just this guy, again, he's the one who's locked up in the cell, but every single moment on screen, you feel like this guy feels like he's in the most control of the situation at hand. It's such a fantastic little thing that Brian Cox brings, that confidence that he can just look right through Graham and see exactly what is going on in this man and quickly figure everything out. That he feels like the type of guy who has this wonderful exterior of charm and everything. When he has that scene where he's on the phone calling up Dr. Sidney Bloom's office and anything, he's richly charming and charismatic, that this is a guy you could meet on the street and not think he has any of those types of tendencies that he actually has. So he can put this fantastic facade of charisma and charm, but he's a terrifying presence to behold. He only has 3 scenes in the whole film, but it makes such a strong impression upon the audience and in the film in general that he has enough impact that even Michael Mann says there was a temptation, because he's such an intriguing and charismatic character, to add more of him into the film, but he felt the restraint approach was better, to leave the audience wanting more for this character, to want to have more experience somewhere down the line, which was obviously a very key type of thing towards the popularity of this character in other hands. But the fact of the matter is, you've got Brian Cox adding in such, again, a frighteningly intelligent portrayal that just crawls in underneath your skin. And I love that dynamic between Lecter and Graham here, that as you go along, as Graham gets further into that mindset and everything, you see later on in the film where he's on the phone with him, there are moments in that scene where Lecter starts saying certain things that, if this was the Graham from earlier in the film, he might have been uncomfortable instead of trying to shut him down or trying to run away from the moment. Instead, this is a Graham in the moment where he can actually see the meaning behind what Lecter's trying to tell him, where you don't fight your nature, all that type of stuff. These things where he would have otherwise been agitated by those comments, but he can see that Lecter is trying to intentionally inform him, educate him on something more to further his journey towards tapping into the mindset of the killer he is hunting. It's such a fantastically interesting way to write a character and present this character and have him affect a story in this type of way, where he doesn't have all that much freedom, but he's clever enough. He's so intelligent and cunning in a certain way where he can get those little things to slip through the cracks and everything. It's a really good performance here that I think just adds so much fascinating qualities to the tapestry that is this film. And actor Dennis Farina was someone I always enjoyed watching on screen, and started off as a Chicago cop and got into acting a little bit with being a henchman in Michael Mann's Thief, getting cast in a really good episode of Miami Vice, and after Manhunter, Michael Mann cast him as the lead in his other 1980s produced television series of Crime Story, very much solidifying Dennis Farina as a very solid type of actor, typically getting cast as cops and gangsters and whatnot with that perfect Chicago type of vibe to him. You could play either side of the whole thing, and playing the character of Jack Crawford was probably a little bit second nature to him, playing another cop of sorts as an FBI agent. And I like that the character of Jack Crawford has a little bit of an agenda here, that yeah, he's being protective of Will Graham, he kind of has some of his best interests in mind, but he's still kind of using him as a means to an end, that one way or another he has to close this case. He has to find this killer and just be done with this whole thing, because he's got no other resource available to him except Will Graham, this guy who could end up being a very volatile, unpredictable type of tool that he has if things go really off the deep end. And it's really just nice how he plays so many good scenes here where he does seem to have genuine care for him, but when things get frayed and up to the wit's end of everything there, the two of them break out in this freaking argument and whatnot, and Crawford says, yeah, he would go ahead and drag them all out of retirement and throw them into this whole thing all over again if it meant solving the damn case. So it's a very interesting dynamic there. It's not just this one note type of character. It's a little bit of detail in there, a little bit of layers in there with the character that does have certain priorities here, that he, even if he cares about this guy who he's a friend with and everything, he's still got to do his job. He's got to find the best way to solve this case, and the best way to do that is to drag this guy, wounded and scarred and everything from his past experiences, back into the mix. And if things go a little bit off the deep end, he's going to try to keep it from there, because he still shows that later on in the climax of the whole film, where he's just trying to keep Will from charging into danger and whatnot. But it's such a nice little balancing act with the character there, where he's got a certain agenda, but he still does care for his friend up to a point, but he's got to use him as a means to an end, regardless of his overall ultimate health and whatnot. So it's a very interesting teetering point there with this character, and being such a good actor here, and just taking all that life experience as a cop, adding that into the fiber of the character of Jack Crawford. I think it creates a really nice mix of everything. And Stephen Lang is also another fantastic actor who had another fantastic Miami Vice episode as well. I love his portrayal as Freddie Lowndes, because unapologetically just a total tabloid sleazebag of a piece of crap that you just absolutely relish watching on screen, because you could just see how this guy just absolutely just stirring the pot so much, and he's just creating so many waves in the whole makeup of the narrative here, that when he gets in that scene where Dolarhyde abducts him and everything, his acting is fantastic, because his terror is just absolutely feeling so authentic, so genuine. He is absolutely terrified to be in the presence of this guy he wrote all this dirty shit about, knowing it's all kind of fabricated nonsense that he just published in his rag magazine and everything. being in the presence of this guy and just being terrified of just the thought of the guy, and then seeing the visage of him. He plays it so well. Stephen Lang proves just from this early on in his career here, has a really good solid acting chops, and seeing the range of the characters he's played over the years definitely even expands that beyond that. He plays his character absolutely perfectly without any sense of reserve. He's fully into this, the juicy nuggets of this character. I really enjoy what he brings forth as Freddie Lounge in this film. I think he does a really solid job here. One person I feel is a little bit of the weak link in the general cast here is Joan Allen has become a fantastic actress, but whether it's the case of not having as much time to develop her character, not being as written as strongly in the screenplay or whatnot, her character of Reba McClane, she doesn't get as much substance or as much time to develop as a character to be very much a rich or very enveloping type of character as so many of these other characters are. She is a very good cog in the whole thing. I always felt like Joan Allen's either portrayal or the way the character was written really just never delivered overall. I feel just like one of those things in the film that just got a little bit shortchanged when you kind of cut down other things from the source material as well. Which brings me to Tom Noonan's masterful portrayal of Francis Dolarhyde here, who is a guy who's had some very interesting things throughout his career, but this is something that people will always dearly remember him for, because start out here with what Michael Mann did excise from the novel into the screenplay was all the backstory that was put forth in the novel about Dolarhyde's upbringing and what made him into what he was, which is alluded to in a scene in the theatrical cut of the film when you get closer to the end of the film, where right before Graham puts all the pieces together, kind of figures out that he's probably was an abused infant and battered child or whatnot. So it's a little bit alluded to, but we don't get that fully explored in his backstory. It's not until almost over an hour into the film that we get the introduction of Francis Dolarhyde, again portrayed magnificently by Tom Noonan, who he plays such an interesting, sympathetic monster who is still a condemnable monster. That you see all these things when you get him introduced in that scene with Freddie Lounge. Yeah, he's creepy as shit. Just the soft-spoken quality of his performance, just understated. Again, a little bit subtlety here and there adds so much to the presence of the character. He doesn't have to overplay the moment. He has that nice, soft type of way of speaking. There's like, it's a great thing about the advice to actors is never show your top range. Don't ever show the limit of where you can go. If you can play it down more, you still have a lot of places more to go, which can make a character like this infinitely more creepy. But when you get that story evolving between him and Reba there, that you see this guy does have a certain fractured soul inside. There is a sympathetic part of him somewhere where he can feel something. He can feel sympathy, he can feel a passion, he can feel love, he can feel affection, but it's something that's so foreign to him in a certain way, something that just he's never really fully experienced in his life, that once he does start experiencing it, it's something that he doesn't know how to handle it. It just drives him off of a different edge in a certain way, where he's almost losing control after the whole night with Reba has that sexual encounter. And that's the fantastic thing. You can not just show one side of the character, you can show multifaceted qualities that you can take in different types of ways, where again he's a condemnable monster, but he has all these fascinating pieces of dimension within himself. I just love so much of what they do with the character of Dolarhyde here. Even if they do excise all that background information about him, they do just present him as a very three-dimensional character, even if they only have half the film to show you his character and a handful of scenes. You still get a full type of character here that makes a fucking solid impression on the audience. And just everything they do with the physical appearance of Dolarhyde here, with again the cleft palate and the grayed hair and stuff like that, it just creates a very interesting way to perceive the character, whose self-perception is very much distorted and exaggerated to make him feel like he is a very much a highly disfigured person, which reflects back upon everything. All these little things just feed into the information that you have about this character, how he perceives himself and how he handles himself. All these things Tom Noonan does, and everything that's built into this character from the source material onwards into this new mix that Michael Mann puts together for the presentation of Dolarhyde. Wonderful type of stuff, and just how he just has all these different qualities about him, where again it did kind of diminish some things about the character. First the backstory, but also there's originally supposed to have that red dragon tattoo blazoned across his physique and everything, but after a couple of days of filming and whatnot, Michael Mann felt like the tattoo trivialized his struggle, and for what Mann was kind of going for, something that was much more based within the man instead of being highly focused on the entire power and strength and obsession with the great red dragon paintings and the mythology that surrounded all that type of stuff, making it more about the man and the fractured person inside of him or all that type of stuff. I understand him going in that route, saying that it didn't quite work for what the presentation was, the direction was for his portrayal of the character in this film. I understand why he pulled back upon that. And even when you see some of the stills with the artwork that they put across him, it doesn't seem like it would hold up terribly well over time. I think in the later adaptations of Red Dragon, they did a far more authentic job of creating much more of a really good sort of red dragon tattoo. This one seemed a little bit more type of cartoony in a certain way. It didn't feel like as solid and authentic and as probably gritty as it should. Looked a little bit more artsy, pastel type of thing that I don't think really holds up terribly well. So in that type of way, I think they made a better choice in terms of, again, the direction they were going with the character and presentation of what Dolarhyde really was for this version of the storyline. And while there are still many references to the Red Dragon throughout the entire film, such as the note that is sent to Lecter, the poster of the Great Red Dragon painting in Dolarhyde's home, and the entire speech he gives to Freddie Lowndes, Mann seemed to focus more on the entire idea of mirrors and reflection and distortion of self throughout the entire film, because you've got Dolarhyde who takes all these victims, changes them into beings who will want and desire him, putting mirrors in their eyes and everything to reflect back upon himself what he truly wants to be seen as. And so Mann uses that in a motif throughout the entire film with many reflection shots, starting off mainly with Will Graham, because you have that scene after Graham goes to the Leeds house and sees the bloody aftermath and goes in the bathroom where you got the reflections bouncing off of all the mirrors and everything, and he hears that answering machine message with Valerie Leeds' voice on it, which triggers a connection to one of the victims here, which gets called back to later in the film after Graham tells his wife that he has to go off to Atlanta to be alone to fully immerse himself into the mindset of this killer. He has that scene in the coffee shop where he's looking at his own reflection in the window, talking to it after he hears the answering machine message yet again from Valerie Leeds. And that's the next step in his process, that he's going to find the killer deep within himself in order to find the actual killer that's out there that they're hunting. So that's a nice little thing that continues to manifest and forge itself throughout the film. And after you have that fantastic scene where you've got Crawford and Graham in that room, and Graham is just going over those tapes over and over again, trying to put the final pieces together, and just again have that fantastic sequence of acting from William Petersen. Is all starting, all the synapses, neural pathways are starting to coalesce in his brain, and it's a fantastic moment of acting for William Petersen. Just absolutely pitch perfect how he just goes through that process to put the little things together, sees all the little details, and starts finally getting to that moment where he gets that epiphany that Dolarhyde, the killer, has seen these films, and he finally puts the final pieces together, and you see him standing at that window again. We don't see his reflection this time, but he touches that glass one last time as sort of this final process that he has to find, like, he's found the killer that he's been looking for. He no longer has to be within the mindset, but he's still forged forward throughout the rest of the film into the climax of it, where he's driven towards defeating, disposing of this deeply distorted, disturbed psychological being out there that he's been looking for this entire time. It's a very interesting thing how they use the mirrors. Again, Will Graham is still a guy throughout the entire film. He can still peer into that mirror, still see himself, but also see the enemy that he's trying to find. While Dolarhyde, the mirrors get smashed all over the place. He's a guy who can't really look himself in the mirror because all he sees is a distorted, exaggerated version of himself. And even in the climax, when he finally gets a last look at himself in one of the shards, he's still someone who just cannot look at himself because he just cannot stand what he is overall. It's just this, again, another sort of compulsion, revulsion type of thing where Dolarhyde, he's just this character who's compelled to keep doing these things, but he's sort of repulsed by his own self. There's such an interesting dynamic between these two characters who, again, reflect back upon one another, but in a very interesting type of uneven type of fashion. It's such a good thing here, this psychological dynamic that continues to forge throughout the whole film, and using those visual motifs of the mirrors and everything, and how Graham comes to that realization after talking with Lecter and getting that one moment where he goes back into Leeds' house and sees what it is that the killer saw. Is such a really good type of progression in that type of way, and keeping a visual type of slightly surreal type of thing that Mann really kind of was going for in The Keep, and took a little bit of that and applied it into the psychological visualization of these characters in the film. Uses so many different things stylistically in this film that comes off so magnificently well, and definitely one of those things is a cinematography from Dante Spinati, this wonderful Italian cinematographer who just brought forth such amazing types of things to Michael Mann's vision here. Spinati and Mann collaborated very closely together on this film to make pertinent and atmospheric use of color, with Spinati introducing Mann to the very romantic blue gels that he ended up using in the love scene between Will and Molly in the film, and just using color in a very moody sense overall to just, again, it's very 80s in a certain way, having a lot of pastel colors mixed into the vibrance of the film, but I think with the visual style that they go for in the film adds to the immersive experience that Mann really was going for overall. With they use such good steady cam work in this film to keep a fluid sense, sort of a stream of consciousness from one moment to the next, one beat to the next. They just move the camera around in such fluid type of ways to just keep you in that mindset of whether it's Dolarhyde or Graham or whatnot. They use very much the movement of the camera and the starkness or the colors or whatnot to really give you a sense of mood and place. I mean, the stark whiteness of Lecter's cell definitely has a striking image to it that just sells something very interesting about it overall, that there's so many bright visuals in the film mixed in with some very moody, darker type of stuff that creates a very interesting sort of visual aesthetic for the film in general, that again, some of it is a little dated with just the color schemes in general. Some of the fashions do as well, but some of the cinematography in the film is just absolutely inspired when you get some of the shots that are just against a rising sun or sunset in general. The beauty of it all just bursts out and just soaks the screen with such wonderful type of inspired imagery in the film. But something I really like with what Spinati and Mann do is that they know how to kind of cut up the frame in certain points, just how to angle the camera or block out a shot or whatnot, where certain characters like Will Graham will be kind of in just like 1/4 of the screen, but it just kind of cuts up in a very interesting type of way, where again with some of his films, Mann just uses certain geometry with certain things, shapes and everything to frame different aspects and direct the eye in certain places on the screen to create a very interesting visual dynamic in general that I've always really liked that about this film. And the cinematography and the blocking of certain scenes and certain shots can really inform you a lot about the intentions, the openness of characters, or just the relationships in general. Like right from the beginning of the film, where you got Jack and Will just sitting on the beach there. You got Jack Crawford with his back to the camera, showing himself to be a little bit more closed off, while Will is front facing, making him seem much more open in a certain way. So Jack has a little bit of an agenda there, so he's a little bit more closed off the audience, Will is much more open book, much more open with what he has to say and feel in general. Or like when you get into that cell between Will and Lecter, starts off the scene with a regular sort of shot, reverse shot. One guy's on the left side of the screen, one guy's on the right side of the screen, but close to the end of the thing, they're almost dead center, overlapping from shot to shot, showing how much more these two people's mindsets, psychologies are becoming much more in alignment as the scene goes on, using that type of stuff to inform the audience of the relationships and psychological mindsets of different characters is such a fascinating way to shoot a scene, to use visuals to tell the story, which, man, was such a very good thing. Showed so much with his executive producing creativity on Miami Vice to use visuals and music to tell a story. That shows forth very much in this film. I just like so much what they do with the visual style of Manhunter. A very interesting type of thing here. Like I said before, Mann did consult with a lot of actual forensic technicians, all those types of people who are experts in the field, and it's such a nice thing how they introduce that type of stuff in the film, how they use that type of stuff, which wasn't as prevalent at all as it is today. In a lot of TV shows, a lot of films or whatnot, use a lot of forensic science to solve a crime. They approach it and they present it in such a fantastic way in this film. I mean, it's one of the most uniquely memorable sequences in the film where they're just taking that note from the Tooth Fairy that was sent to Lecter, running it through all these different labs at the FBI offices and everything. Is presented with so much style and so much charisma and so much urgency in a certain way. It's a very memorable sequence because they handle it with so much energy and so much pertinence, and just you get all the information quickly divulged to the audience so they understand what these scientific processes are, what the goal of each one of them is, and what they can and can't do within the time that they have. It's such a very good sequence, and how that stuff is kind of sprinkled out throughout the entire film to understand all these little things that go into tracking down a serial killer is such an interesting way how they just really presented that in this film to again have it be further part of what Will Graham has to go through the evidence of everything and getting into the psychological mindsets through all that stuff. It's such a good type of thing that they really just did that, and pretty much that entire sequence was pretty much the genesis of the eventual William Petersen television series CSI on CBS, so that pretty much is television history from there on out. And you talk about doing things with style, you definitely have to talk about the soundtrack of Manhunter, because yeah, it's purely 1986 synth pop type of music, but with the overall style of the film and what Michael Mann's sensibilities were at the time, and my own taste in music, I thoroughly enjoyed the music of Manhunter because it is just another cog in the fully immersive experience that Michael Mann is trying to envelop you into, because he uses, with the visuals, the music of this film so very, very well to get you into the atmosphere, get you into, again, the mindsets of characters and all this type of things. And you start off with, like, the Reds here, who were originally tasked with doing the full score, but some of their cues were replaced with stuff from Michelle Rubini and Shriekback, and he had a few more pop songs added in there. In regards to that, all this stuff really comes together as a very cohesive whole. Everything feels pretty much of the same vein and works and complements each other throughout the entire film. Some scores, some pieces of music are a little bit more tense, a little more suspenseful. Some stuff is a little bit more intense in a certain way, but all of it really kind of flows through so well. I mean, I like the part where you've got the tiger sequence where you got Dolarhyde and Reba there, Reba, this blind woman, running her hand over this sedated tiger, and you got the fantastic Shriekback song playing through this very sensual type of sequence that Dolarhyde is living vicariously through the tiger, just hoping to have that feeling of sensation to him and that type of connection with another person. But then that Shriekback song, Coelacanth, runs through that sequence into the one where Graham is in the impound, the evidence, feeling that cloth and talking and just trying to get into that mindset, and then it flows back into Dolarhyde's home and everything. So the music continues that sense of flow and fluidity throughout the entire mindsets of characters, just keeping you tuned in, just dialed into everything, and just how they just, again, Michael Mann in the 80s just kind of pioneered that entire type of style of storytelling in a certain way, with using popular music to kind of tell overall impactful type of quiet type of storytelling. Again, the shriekback stuff is fantastic in the film. This big hush when you have that romantic sequence between Reva and Dolarhyde becomes such a perfect type of thing, with a little bit of a vague lyrics kind of fitting the mood and type of odd quality with Dolarhyde in the sequence. Just every single piece of music just flows through so well in the film. Just so much of how music affects the visuals and storytelling of a film was very well known by Michael Mann, and he used all these types of qualities and this type of synth music to really kind of push that forward throughout the entire film. And that is in no better display than in the climax of the film, where the entire climax is actually scored and timed to Iron Butterflies In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, which was actually chosen for the film because Michael Mann was in contact with a convicted murderer who actually thought that that song was a song between him and a woman that he was pretty much obsessed with. And so Michael Mann decided to use that idea and apply it into this sequence to create such a unique, eerie type of atmosphere that just, again, it's so perfectly timed out from beat to beat, every single point of the way, right from the beginning, where you just have this chaos for Reba, not knowing what environment she's in, where Francis is, what's really going on, this whole thing. And then once you get the FBI and all the guys arriving and they're just slowly moving through the forest and everything, you get the nice eerie organ sound section of the entire thing, and then it builds up and builds up to where Graham's like, stop it, he has to stop it. He's watching this thing almost in a voyeuristic type of sense through the window of Dolarhyde's place. He's driven towards that window, and the whole thing just crashes in at the perfect moment. It's a perfect, inspired piece of work with this extremely long jam of a song to really score this long climax of the film with. It just hits all the beats so very well, going into the chaos of the climax of the film, where again you got so many moments with all the fluid cam work and all the moody type of stuff throughout the entire film to envelop you into mindsets of the characters. Now Dolarhyde's become unhinged in the entire film. Everything's just gone completely off the deep end for him. So you start getting all these jarring jump cuts in the film where this is his psychology. This is where he's perceiving everything. Everything's just become unhinged, unreal. And everything starts kind of being jarring and cutting back and forth in very strange type of ways. But you can still follow generally what's going on, but you just have to be enveloped in that psychological mindset to understand where the film is going, why it's doing this now, because it's all through Dolarhyde's point of view in this whole thing. Just seeing the whole thing just cut up and just going off on different frame rates at certain points in time, covering shots that create the most intriguing type of unhinged climax of a film that's very impressionistic in a certain way. And you just have this climax where again you get Graham cut up and everything and thrown to the ground. Then he's just unloading those Glazer safety slugs into Dolarhyde, which earlier in the film said one shot of this would stop anyone. He's got to shoot him 6 times to kill him. And then even then, another inspired impressionistic moment is that another little subtle nod to the Red Dragon type of thing is that once Dolarhyde is dead and he's bleeding on the floor, the blood forms sort of wings upon him in red blood and everything to simulate the Red Dragon slain and everything. It's so much very good stuff with just the stylistic ways of this film in so many different fashions, and just such a good thing that this film just, it's such an interesting film to behold in the pantheon of Hannibal Lecter films, that a lot of the other stuff was a little bit more gothic or a little bit more gritty type of stuff, a little bit more subdued type of visuals, or you get into the Hannibal television series where it's very, very heavily artistic, expressionistic, so sort of avant-garde type of stuff if you want to go that route, but it's all very, very, very heavy. This one's in a completely different type of realm unto itself as well, so no one ever tried to go this route. They always tried to put their own spin on it, so that also makes Manhunter unique in the pantheon of Hannibal Lecter films and adaptations, but not to say the other ones didn't have the unique qualities as well, but this is one that could not have been made in the 90s or the 2000s or whatnot, because it is so perfectly 80s. Again, the visual style of it with the colors splashed around and the music used and everything, you couldn't recapture that type of thing without feeling retro in a certain way. It would have to be made in 1986 to be the film that Michael Mann was inspired to make with this whole production and everything, which on a budget of $15 million only brought back $8.6 million at the box office, making it a box office bomb for a lot of different reasons, possibly because producer Dino De Laurentiis and his company were not on very good financial standing at the time this was being released and marketed. You watch the trailer for this film if you're a fan of it and you've already seen the film. The trailer is okay, but for someone who's never seen Manhunter, the trailer does not market the film in any good fashion at all. It's not very coherent. It's not a very good cut trailer. It doesn't tell you much about the story or anything at all about the film. So I don't think that was very well marketed in a way. Poster's a little bit of a mixed bag where you don't get as much as you want to from a poster telling you the story of the film. I think the marketing of Manhunter was not terribly great. Again, a lot of people involved with the film didn't have a great fascination for the title Manhunter, regardless of how much they might have reduced the Red Dragon elements of the story. A lot of people felt that was a stronger title and should have remained it as faithful to the name of the book. And just in general, was not a film that was put out in a very solid type of fashion. Might not have had as much distribution as it possibly could have been if Dino De Laurentiis was not on terribly great financial standings at the time to do that type of thing. Kind of interesting, this was kind of released in the same month as Transformers the movie, also produced by Dino De Laurentiis, also a box office bomb. So, there you go. Dino put out a lot of very interesting films that have a lot of cult status after the fact because it didn't make it big at the box office at all. So, whatever the case, if he wasn't a big marketing type of master, at least made good films, produced good films that really kind of maintained their audience and grew their audience throughout the entire years. There's one very interesting thing about Manhunter beyond everything else I've talked about, but one other interesting thing, there's actually 4 different versions of this movie. It's very fascinating that this film, this little film that didn't do well at the box office, didn't have a lot of money behind it to market it, distribute or whatnot, someone's made 4 different cuts of this movie. First, of course, is the original theatrical cut, which runs about 2 hours and 1 minute long, which is a completely solid and streamlined version of the film, especially if you've not seen all the extra added footage and scenes in the other cuts I'm getting to shortly. Runs perfectly fine. But about a year after the theatrical release, the movie channel gave Michael Mann the opportunity to cut together a new version of the film, which is available on the Anchor Bay limited edition double disc DVD set, as the director's cut sourced from Michael Mann's videotape master. So the quality is not terribly good, but includes a lot of extra scenes and cuts a little bit out from the theatrical cut. But the main additions add in a little bit of an extended briefing scene at the Atlanta Police Department, where it covers some of the same ground, a little bit of the same ground as the theatrical cut does, but it kind of does in a little bit more of a long form format there. And there's also some extra scenes between Will and Molly, who just adds in more of that emotional connection back to Will's family and everything. Just that quality that you just keep this guy tethered back to his home and his family and his humanity and everything. But before Will Graham goes to meet Hannibal Lecter, he has an extra scene here with Dr. Chilton being his obnoxiously smug self, kind of digging into Will's psychology and how he found and captured Hannibal Lecter and everything, because he's an asshole and everything. There's some extra added bits in there between Will and Lecter in the cell there, and just some extra added bits and pieces throughout the entire film that extends things out, especially when you get into that scene with Will and Jack Crawford at the end of the film, where they're trying to put the pieces together and everything. Man adds in some little extra footage, a little extra dialogue here or there. Just some stuff sprinkled out throughout the rest of the entire film that just extends it out further, kind of expands on some things, just enriches a few little character elements here and there, and expands a few little ideas while still trimming a few little things out here and there from the theatrical cut. But actually includes one of the better scenes that's actually included in the extended version here, is that at the end of the film, after Dolarhyde suspension and all that type of stuff, Will Graham actually goes to see the next family Dolarhyde was targeting, to have that sort of final moment of disconnect. To actually see this family safe, secure, and alive, and that kind of gives him that final moment to just, after he's been cut up and beaten up, he looks like absolute dog shit. It's this final moment where you just get to see that final little bit of disconnect from that entire experience, and he can go back home to his family and try to become the Will Graham he was at the beginning of the film. I think that's a very good scene that adds in that extra little quality. But then Anchorberry released the restored director's cut, which is also the version featured on the Scream Factory Blu-ray set, along with the original theatrical version. And this director's cut only really excises the Dr. Chilton Will Graham scene, possibly because the scene wasn't shot very well. There's some coverage issues with the sequence that doesn't end up looking very good, so they cut that one out. But they also used the best film quality elements possible to string between the little bit cruddier videotape sourced elements to get you the best quality possible to present to the fans of the film. But there's also the oddest version of this film, this unusual hybrid cut that was released on the Anchorberry THX certified release, which was touted as the theatrical cut, but actually has some elements added in from the director's cut, stuff cut out of the theatrical cut, and just comes off as a odd thing where I just have no idea where this version came from, who edited it, what the intention was to create this cut of the film, which is usually found on streaming services such as Netflix and Hulu, HBO Now, usually under Studio Canal's banner and everything. So it seems to only come from Studio Canal when they're licensing out to other services or other distributors. And again, it's an odd cut of the film because you get stuff added in like the scene between Will Graham and Molly when they're having a little kind of romantic interlude, little type of thing in the Washington, D.C. hotel room, which is only from the director's cut. But also the little scene where you have Will Graham, Jeff Crawford, and the Atlanta PD chief walking down that hallway towards the police briefing and everything, which is in both the theatrical and director's cut, but is removed from this version of the film. And there's just little things that are just a little bit odd here and there that just don't mesh up with the theatrical cut or the director's cut. So it's like, where's someone kind of pieced together this version and decide to leave out a few bits here and there and add something in from a different version of the film? I really don't know. But 4 cuts of this film, and there's no definitive version. I can't tell you which version to watch, really, because there's stuff from like the director's cut, which I think is really good, but there's also stuff from the director's cut where it's like, well, that's a little flabby, doesn't really need to be there, like the extended police briefing scene. I think the version of the theatrical cut is perfectly sufficient for the information that is being given out in that sequence, but there's also some stuff here and there in different cuts that I just feel like you just take the right elements from all these versions and you have just the right version of this film in general, because when I watch the theatrical cut, I kind of miss all those scenes between Will and Molly just kind of connecting here and there throughout the entire film. I think those add something extra into the character of Will Graham in general, and when I watch the director's cut, it's like, oh, there's some stuff here, it's like, you cut that out, I think that's quite right, or there's some stuff in there, it's like, well, that's cut together just a little bit better than the theatrical cut. So it's like, some stuff just, I need a definitive version of this film, and we're probably not going to get it. But whichever version of Manhunter you end up watching, I still feel you're in for a very good film. Obviously, I've gone on well long enough to explain what I love about the film, but the fact that this film actually inspired me so much to actually make my own short film called Dead of Night that takes some of the concepts from this film and just pushes it further towards the edge, like if you had Will Graham go a little bit further off the deep end and went off the reservation, went rogue in a certain way, and just became completely consumed by the psychological darkness that he enveloped himself in. That's such the idea I went forward with my own short film that I made several years ago, and just feel so satisfied by the film I made, and that I feel like it is such a strong homage to what Manhunter was. And I just think the cult status of this film has continued to rise and grow and expand over the years to get more appreciation after, again, we've had Silence of the Lambs, the Ridley Scott Hannibal film, and all these other continuing adaptations of Thomas Harris's novels and everything. Manhunter still has a solid fan base out there that a lot of people, again, don't find as much depth in it, don't find as much interesting qualities that appeal to them. But if I had to say anything else, is the fact that I think just Manhunter has such great things going for it that, again, if you can get past some of the stuff that you feel is a little bit dated, some of the fashions, some of the style, some of the set directions, you can get a really fantastic film that I just view like there's psychological thrillers, and then there's Manhunter that use all the elements of filmmaking techniques to just envelop you into the mindsets of characters and into a fully absorbing experience. It's a fantastic piece of cinema. So guys, more I couldn't say, or else I'd go on way too long as it is. Manhunter, I'd like to hear what you guys feel about this film from Michael Mann from 1986. And what do you feel about the other adaptations of Red Dragon, the Brett Ratner film, which never had care to watch, but I did watch all of the Hannibal television series, and I was very much pleased with Richard Armitage, his portrayal of Dolarhyde, and some of the elements they did kind of remix a little bit for the Hannibal television series from the Red Dragon novel, and did spread a lot of its elements out over 3 seasons. But regardless of that, guys, comments below, thumbs up if you've enjoyed thoroughly what I had to offer here in this video. Running out of breath, running out of energy. Thank you very much, guys, for watching this fantastic, hard video to produce, but well worth it in my view. So hopefully it's well worth it to you guys to have sit here and enjoyed everything I had to divulge about Manhunter. So guys, thanks again, wonderfully. Take care. If you want to support the channel, you can get some early access through Patreon. I'll be back very soon with more fantastic stuff. So thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.